At the beginning, maybe we invite you to introduce yourself a little bit.
Okay.
And then we will be starting the questions.
Okay, I'm happy to do that.
Okay.
So
okay, shall we start?
Yes, I'm ready when you are.
Okay, yes, please.
So good evening. My name is Jacqui Miller. I am currently in Cleveland, Ohio, and I have a job with the Cleveland School District. I am the Director of Montessori Programming and Operations, which is a new position that just began last year. And so I will tell you a little bit about me going backwards. So this position with the school district came about because I was the founding principal of a charter Montessori school, which was public, but not part of the district. So a charter in the U.S. is an independent public school. And so we opened Stonebrook Montessori in 2015, and I was the principal there for 5 years. And then Stonebrook merged with a neighboring school that was part of the school district. So it is no longer a charter. It is now part of the public school district. And these two schools are merging and becoming one with a commitment to being Montessori. So right now, the more than half of the teachers in that school are not yet Montessori trained and are just learning about Montessori and just beginning on their journey. Our school district has a second Montessori school, which has been Montessori for many years and is in the process of working toward greater implementation. And so they have already experienced many challenges and have conquered many of them. So I have the experience of both of these schools to be able to share now, which is a little different than when we met. I was still the principal at that charter school.
Yeah.
And before that, I worked in the private sector for 20 years. 4 years, I was an elementary teacher. So I am elementary trained through AMI. I trained in 1993. A long time ago. And I worked with elementary students for about 4 years. And then I moved into middle school and was part of developing the Montessori, the NAMTA, North American Montessori Teachers Association here in the U.S. Was doing summer orientations. That has now become an AMI diploma course. The first diploma course is happening here in Ohio. Lori Ewert-Crocker is the director of training there, and there are several other trainers doing that as well. So that is where I have most of my Montessori experience is with middle school students. So this position in the district is new, and last year was a difficult year. We were all experiencing the pandemic, so our whole school district was remote for most of the year. Students were learning from home. And just toward the end of the year, I guess just in March, maybe end of March, some students came back in smaller. We had half of the students on Monday and Tuesday and the other half on Thursday and Friday. So the hybrid experience. And then just this school year, we've come back fully into the classroom 5 days a week. So that is my current work is trying to craft. And so the school district, the Cleveland Metropolitan School District, has a commitment to Montessori. We have these two schools. And so I am working with both of those schools and also at creating from those two schools' experiences a model. So if we were to have more, which hopefully we will in the future, then we would have a model for Montessori that all of the schools would be able to follow. So,
okay, that's very interesting. I'm very interested. Why do you come to Montessori first? Why do you choose Montessori?
So I love working with children, but I was resisting being an educator. I studied architecture in college, and I was determined to be, actually I wanted to be an interior designer, and I love design work. And I learned about Montessori. So I have an older sister who was a teacher, And I knew there was something about traditional education that it just wasn't for me. My sister worked in the public schools, and she said, "Oh, it's so hard, and you don't have the resources you need." And so she was also suggesting that I do other things. And there was something about traditional education that it wasn't quite right. I wanted to be with children. I wanted to be an educator, but working in traditional school didn't seem quite right. And I had a colleague whose son was enrolled in a Montessori school, and she was telling me about Montessori, and I was so intrigued right away. I just thought, this is so interesting and so different. And I learned a little about it, and later that year, I went and did my training. Luckily, my parents live in the DC area, and so I was able to do my training at Washington Montessori while I lived at home with my parents for a year. So I recognize that as a privilege. It is not easy to take a year off to get Montessori training.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful that I was able to do that. And so when I reflect now, what was it about Montessori that intrigued me? And I think it aligns with the way I think about learning, right? That we are all intrinsically motivated. We're all curious. I'm very curious. I always want to know more things and learn more things. And so I think it fits with the way humans develop. And I'm compelled by the goal of Montessori education being social reform and working toward peace, and the elements of justice that are embedded in Montessori, that everyone deserves the kind of education that will allow us all to reach our full potential. Right? It's not about learning information. It's about growing and developing in the way that we are meant to then have a contribution to this world, our cosmic task. So all of those elements of Montessori theory really appealed to me.
That was when how old were you?
I was 26.
26, and you were not doing Montessori before.
I was not doing education even before.
Yeah.
No.
So it's a big change.
It was a big change. Yes. Yes. And I fell in love with it. I knew right away that elementary was the age, not primary. Little children are not my strong suit. And so I was drawn to elementary. The curiosity and cosmic education was very appealing. And then soon into my career, and I enjoyed teaching elementary, but then when I had the opportunity, and it was one of my 6th year students was going to a new middle school program. And I went with her and her family. They asked me to go with them to an information night. This was a brand new middle school that Arbor Montessori was developing. And I went with them, and I learned about the adolescent work. And then later that year, a position came open, and I moved into the adolescent work. And that's my love. I love middle school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It seems that there are many American teachers like you are, because I know that there are more than thousands of public Montessori school now in the States, right?
We are close to 1,000. I'm not sure if we have that many yet. I think
really?
We're getting close, though. I think we're approaching. Yes.
Yeah, that's a lot still compared to other places. Could you tell us why it's so getting popular? So many people are going to Montessori schools.
So Montessori is very popular in the private schools, and people have to, families have to have enough income to pay for private schools. And so the growth in Montessori public schools, there have been a couple of waves in our history in the U.S. where Montessori has been more present in the public schools. This current wave that we are in, where there's extraordinary expansion right now, it started probably in the 90s when the laws changed around charter schools, and charter schools became a new model for education where public funds were available for individual schools. So not to whole school districts, but to individual schools. And those schools were accountable to, when we're using public funding, so taxpayer money, then the families don't have to pay. And so there was an increase in this possibility, this opportunity to make Montessori available for more families through the possibility of having charter schools. At the same time, school districts are increasing, and there was a previous wave. It was in the, I want to say the 60s and 70s, that came from desegregation. When schools in the United States were desegregated, having schools become Montessoris, that's when magnet schools started within districts. And so having schools adopt Montessori pedagogy was a way to keep families, to keep some of the white families and draw them in to schools that would then be integrated. So Montessori became popular as a magnet school right in the era of desegregation. So it has been related to politics on one level and to financial supports and financial possibilities on another level, which both of those have been opportunities to expand Montessori to more families and to more children, those who don't have the money to afford to go to a private school. So that's what has driven, and that's what currently continues to drive the Montessori in the public sector is a move toward justice and greater access for Montessori for more children.
But then why are parents join Montessori?
That is an interesting question. And so when we started Stonebrook, I had the opportunity to invite parents into Montessori. And I heard a couple of different things from my experience with our families here in Cleveland. They appreciate that it is personalized, right? That it follows the child. And many families would say, so, my child's a little, she's really active. Like, would that be okay? I'm like, absolutely. They have freedom of movement. Really? My child could be happy in this kind of an environment where they work at their own pace, where they are free to move, where they have hands-on engagement. We talk about projects and they would get very excited about that. So it speaks to a vision that parents have for their children when they have children who they know are experiencing life in a way that learning will be joyful for them. They want their children to have a joyful learning experience, and they want their children's individual needs to be met. They will say, well, she's not real good at math, or she doesn't like math. So how would that be supported? And the idea that there would be a relationship with the teacher, that they would stay for 3 years with the teacher, and that the teacher would get to know their child, that really appeals to families. Those were the major things we heard: the individual pace and the ability, the freedom of movement, and the hands-on engagement with learning. Yeah. And I think the other important part of the conversation was always, we would say, your child is a unique human, and our goal is to help that child reach their full potential. And parents would say, yeah, I think she's going to be an artist, or I think she's going to be, she's really interested in science, so she could pursue that. Absolutely, she could pursue that. So the idea that an individual's child's potential and their own drives and their own interests would be key in their learning, that really appeals to families, to parents who want what's best for their children.
I think also parents are looking at the outcomes. What do you see the graduate students from your schools?
Yeah.
Are they really different?
So that's a very interesting question. And in the public sector in the United States, there are lots of achievement assessments around academic learning. Right? And that is most attention is put, and that is the most highly valued outcome, is academic and cognitive development. And what we find with our Montessori schools, and the schools in Cleveland are not showing significant improvement or significantly higher scores than other schools and other children are receiving academically. But what we are paying attention to are the other outcomes of Montessori: the whole child, the social and emotional growth, their independence, their curiosity. We are noticing that our students have their interpersonal skills are different, and their engagement in work is different. And so they love learning. There is a joy. They want to go to school. Parents always say, she doesn't want to stay homesick. So they like to come to school. So that joy of learning and the additional outcomes. So it is a tender place for us, because we're not seeing extra high academic achievement, but we are seeing different and other outcomes that are measurable and noticeable and valuable in terms of the growth of the whole child.
Mm-hmm. And those are important.
Those are important. And in the public sector, it is challenging because we have to demonstrate academic growth as well.
Right.
And so we're asking a lot of questions. The United States has a phenomenon called the achievement gap, and children of color don't tend to score as highly as white children in terms of academic success in most schools. And so we're working hard to understand in Montessori schools, because we see the same gap. It's not as big a gap, and our children tend to do well in other ways as well that it can be measured. But we're still trying to understand that. What is that? Why is that? And how can Montessori schools support children in getting high academic scores, as well as growing in these other areas that are so important. So we don't have all the answers around that. It is an important point of consideration, and continued scientific pedagogy, right? To learn and to understand and to keep working to serve our students better.
Adaptation is an important element for Montessori education goal.
Yes.
How do you see your students that after they graduate from your school, if they don't go continuously to like higher level of Montessori school, are they able to adjust into the so-called traditional or normal environment in traditional schools? Are they doing okay?
So I don't have much experience in the public sector here in Cleveland with graduates. We're a young school. We started our school 7 years ago. The children are now just moving through middle school, so we don't have a lot of experience yet with that population going on to high school. The other school in the district has been around for a longer time, and there are no Montessori high school options. So children transition into other more traditional schools, and they do just fine. I don't have any specific data about that. I haven't looked at that yet. I don't know that we are tracking that. That's another place where we have to capture more evidence. But what I can say from my private school experience working with middle school for many, many years is that when students graduate from or leave a Montessori school at 8th grade, which many of our schools do, they know themselves as learners. And that's something we're striving to do in the district, is to make sure that there is enough individualization for children so that they know how they learn best. And then they can ask for that, advocate for themselves, right? So if a student is a visual learner and they're in a class where the information is all given in written form, they know to seek visual supports and to create visuals for themselves to help them understand as a study strategy or a skill. So they know themselves as learners, and that allows them to adapt to whatever the situation is. However they are given their information, they know how to process it to support their own learning. What we also found with our students is that they tended to be the ones who would volunteer for in class discussions, right? They were engaged learners. So they would answer questions. They would participate in discussion groups. They were engaged in a way that high school teachers noticed, right? Like, oh, we noticed this about the Montessori students coming in. They also often got involved in extracurricular activities, being engaged in a school community. And they also sought a particular kind of a relationship with their teachers. So they would be the ones to ask questions. They asked for help readily. They shared ideas. They would ask, this is the assignment. Can I modify it? Could I do it this way? So they were engaged and had a relationship with the adults where they anticipated that they could talk to adults, right? That there was not the kind of power differential that sometimes you see in traditional education where the teacher knows everything and the students just do what they're told. Our Montessori graduates expected there to be a different relationship with their teachers. And they transitioned and adapted successfully. We also spent a lot of time helping them choose a high school, right? So the choice of where to go was already part of them knowing themselves. Some kids knew they wanted a big school. Some kids knew they wanted a smaller school or an arts-focused school or something like that. So we helped them in that transition, which I think also helped with their success. right, in adapting to that space. They were able to go where they knew that there were things there that were aligned with their learning.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the public area, the school district, they always ask for like the achievement performance from the standard test.
Yes.
Or other quantitative data. How do you deal with that?
That is a challenge space. That is a place where we are challenged. Now, if students stay in the public sector, then there is not an admissions. They're not denied access to a school if their scores aren't good. Cleveland is a unique city in that we have portfolio schools. So we have a number of unique high school options. There is a school of architecture. There is a school of design. There is a school that's focused on technology. There's a school that is a STEM, a science school. And so there are a number of different options for students to go, a school of the arts, where they can choose what they are interested in terms of an academic focus. And then there is an application process, but also that has to do then with the model, the type of the school model, and what they have achieved. And so test scores don't keep children out of, like, it's not an entrance exam in the public sector. Now, in private sector, that is a bigger factor, and they do use more admissions criteria for high schools. But it is important, right? The academic test scores are they're the marker of success in learning at this point. And so again, we don't have significant, our Montessori students aren't significant, they're not advanced significantly in a way that across the board is attributable to Montessori. We also have not done a lot of data collection. We have not tracked and followed our students to be able to have much data yet. I'm hoping that we will be able to do more of that. I think it's a very important thing for us to look at and to pay attention. And then to begin to ask the questions, right? When we do see improved scores, what do we notice about that? Are these the children who started at 3? Are they the children who started, what are the variables so that we can begin to be aware and continue to be successful and support children in being more successful with their test scores. It is varied, it varies. And again, many of our students in the Cleveland area specifically, and I think in many urban areas, many of our public Montessori schools are in large urban areas where you have an intersection of a number of factors. They tend to be higher percentages of low income families, and they tend to be higher percentages of children of color. And again, those statistics across demographics and across school types, those students aren't achieving at the same levels as their wealthier white counterparts. So we have a lot of questions in this country to explore to try to understand student achievement and Montessori to contribute to that. We don't yet have a lot of studies. There are some beginning to show improved scores through Montessori education. And we see them as students get older. So not so much in first, second, or third grade, but by the time we get to 5th, 6th, and middle school, we are starting to have some data that suggests that they do perform better over time, which makes sense from the Montessori perspective because of the developmental continuum, right? Yep, the academic development coming a little later than it is expected in some of the achievement scores.
Well, but reality is reality. When the bureaucratic, the school district person, they come and ask for immediate result. How do you respond to them?
Yeah.
How do you say?
Well, we give them the results. We give them whatever information there is, and then we say, depending on what they show, we then also say, would you also like to talk about other outcomes that we are seeing, right, in other ways that our children are developing? And again, our Montessori students are not doing worse than others, but we don't yet have significant evidence to say they are doing better. And that's a big challenge for charter schools, charter Montessori schools that have to be evaluated on a regular basis, and the test scores are a major part of that. And so they are in jeopardy of losing their funding and of losing their charters if they are not showing significant achievement results.
Do you know any charter school that's been canceled the support from the government?
Yeah, I don't know of any that have been canceled. I know of a couple that have come very close. And so there's a process. And in fact, at Stonebrook, we were a young school. We had not yet established many years of testing data, but we were cautious of that. And and at the end of our 5 years, when we needed to renew our charter, that was a concern. That was definitely a concern. And so that is a risk, and schools are vulnerable to that as a reason for closing. But I don't know of any specifically that closed for that reason. But I know it has made it very hard, and people have had to work very hard. And then it feels like you're then compromising your Montessori if you're pushing academics in a way that you're needing to get, develop student academic achievement at the expense of some other aspects of their development. It makes it hard. It makes it very hard to maintain your faithful commitment to Montessori when you're being expected also to show academic results, maybe at developmental stages where we wouldn't expect that to be the push yet.
Yeah, we are a little bit lucky here in Taiwan because we have law that allows the public school to run their according to the ideology of education. Like if you want to run Montessori, and you will be assessed according to the education that you are running. Yeah, but still, I think the society as a whole will ask for the quantitative result. Test result.
Yes.
So we have to learn more from you. Okay, so it's very important to have good education, to have and teacher is very important element to provide good education. How do you prepare your teachers in the public sectors?
Yes, this is such a good question. This is part of my work right now, and we are exploring how to do this well. So most of our public schools will send, as they are able, and as teachers are willing, will send them to traditional Montessori training. You were at the conference with the National Center for Montessori in the public sector, and they have developed a model for teacher training that looks more specifically at the needs of the public sector, because in the US, we have to have regular state certification and Montessori training. And the state certification is the most important. So you have to have that to teach in a public school. So some states in the US have a pathway for Montessori trained educators who don't have their state certification to get that. And many public schools struggle to get Montessori trained teachers. So imagine that we say we're a Montessori school, but then our teachers aren't Montessori trained. And so again, we are not able to implement our methodology with the most fidelity. So the challenge for public schools, especially districts and charters as well, is to get trained teachers who also then have their teaching license for the state. A number of states have specific pathways for teachers to be able to get that, with maybe a few extra college courses that would be needed if they don't already have an education degree. So one of the things that we are exploring here in Cleveland is how do we because this school that has just merged, there are many traditionally trained teachers with their credential who are now ready to and are interested in becoming Montessori teachers. And the regular Montessori training that takes a full year or 3 summers is a lot to ask. And they're already experienced teachers. And so we are exploring and really grappling with how do we help teachers who are already trained, who are successful educators, to learn how to be Montessori educators. And does that mean they have to do a full training? Do they have to start at the beginning? And so there are no we don't have any other options right now, but we are having this conversation. We're talking with different training centers. There is a program at Xavier University in Cincinnati that is especially designed for teachers who already have their Montessori training. It's still quite lengthy, but that's the one university that I'm aware of that has been conscious of thinking of that particular group of teachers and how to support them in getting the Montessori as an addition to already being licensed and trained teachers. So there is not an easy answer to that. It is an ongoing challenge to have teachers with enough Montessori training and knowledge to be able to implement the model with fidelity. It provides a funding, it has to be paid for, and Montessori training is not inexpensive, and it is also a significant time commitment. And so we're striving to bring training to Cleveland. And so we're working with some training centers that might be able to do satellite programs, and we're exploring options for teacher preparation.
Okay.
Yeah.
You have satellite program?
No, I was seeing there are some training centers that will. So, for example, there is not a training center in Ohio for elementary training. Right. And so teachers would have to go away, and that many teachers can't do that. Not really. And so there are some training centers that will do a satellite. They will send a trainer to your city to do what's called a satellite training. So that the trainees don't have to travel. But if there are enough people in one city, they can send a trainer to do that.
Mm-hmm. For how long?
That depends. There are some academic year training programs, and then there are also some summer programs. And I know I'm more experienced with AMI than with AMS, but I know that AMI is exploring different formats. So doing some online, so that there might just be summer intensives and then some online training. That is the case with the program at Xavier University. They will come, if you arrange with them, they could come and do a summer intensive, and then much of the work during the year is now done online. So that is helping. That is helping to make it more accessible for more people. But there is almost always some in-person expectation for Montessori training, where you get your hands on things and where you can build community with your training cohort.
Yeah, we are in need to have teacher trained in Montessori. So maybe is it possible that we can work this way together with you to train teachers in the future?
It would be fascinating to explore that. I would love to explore the possibilities. Yeah. Yes.
We have lots of young teachers or young generations. They would like to learn Montessori more, but it's just difficult, and might have very limited chance.
Yes.
And it would be good if we can, work that way together with you.
It'd be very interesting. Nice. Let us talk about that. Let us see.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Back to your what you say, Montessori trained. What do you mean by that?
So the training for Montessori that results in a credential,
right,
from AMI or from AMS, or from any other program that is MACT accredited. Are you familiar with MACT?
Yeah.
The Montessori accreditation. I don't remember now what it stands for, but it is the umbrella organization that they have some minimal standards for Montessori training, and so it needs to a teacher preparation program has to have at least has to have a MACT accreditation, or AMI or AMS. Specifically, most of them are all under the umbrella of MACT, so that there is some assurance that a minimum amount of Montessori training has happened, and expectations. And I don't know exactly what all of the parameters are for that, but that is the standard that we have been using, and they vary. The training programs will vary. Some are 1 year, some are 2 years, or summers. So they vary in the way that they are presented and how long it would take a teacher to do that. Mm-hmm. But there aren't any programs yet that I know of that might might be small. So I have a vision of smaller modules that if, let's say, a teacher has an education degree already and then a teaching certificate in their state, that maybe they just need to focus on one or two aspects that have to do with Montessori key pieces of pedagogy, and then key pieces of methodology for their age group. And not have to necessarily do a full training. But I don't know. And I don't know of any that are doing that yet. But I think right now is an exciting time for teacher training, just because we have had the necessity of exploring other ways to do, especially virtual experiences and education that way, that I think there is an openness to looking at different formats for Montessori training that will be, that will have the essentials of the pedagogical part, the theoretical part, which you always have to be able to go back to,
Right.
and the specific practical, how do you move those materials around and use the wonderful Montessori learning materials. So it's the philosophy and the methods both have to be part of good teacher preparation.
Mm-hmm. Well, for training teachers, what would you suggest us to do? Like do with AMI or AMS or any other METI thing?
MACT, yes. So I don't have a strong recommendation. I think finding a format. What we're doing in Cleveland is looking for a trainer and a training organization that can provide something that will be responsive to our community and to our educators. I think it's important, right? With Montessori, we want to meet children where they are. I think it's important for adult learners as well, that the Montessori training helps orient to your specific needs and your specific community and environment. And so I don't know that it matters whether it's AMI or AMS, but I think what is most important is recognizing and looking for a program that has that good balance of theory and practice, so that educators are prepared and really deeply understanding the developmental continuum, right? Because I think there's a little bit of Montessori practice that we could adapt, right? That doesn't have to be done exactly the way a trainer showed you to do it. Right? That teachers can have more autonomy, but what's important is the theory, and therefore you would make a decision as to whether or not, if I'm going to give this lesson, or if I don't have a lesson for this particular thing and I need to make my own lesson. I have a theoretical background, so that what I'm doing is in the spirit of Montessori theory, and uses materials properly and really thinks about the developmental needs of the children that are being served. And then there can be more flexibility. I think some Montessori training is a little too rigid, and that there can be more flexibility for skilled educators to know what to do, and to have some freedom to do things within alignment with a theoretical, philosophical standpoint.
I see.
Yeah.
So
there are many schools. There are some training centers that are starting that are independent, and that is so independent trainings can get MACT accreditation and not be affiliated with one of the large training organizations, which each has their own requirements for what a trainer, how you can become a trainer, and what a training program has to include. There are an increasing number of trainings that are being offered that are independent of any of those traditionally, training organizations that have traditionally provided that service. So,
okay. I hope in the future we can work this how to prepare teachers together. I think what you are doing is very important for us to learn. Okay, now let's move to transform the school. How do you transform a regular school, a traditional school, into a Montessori type school?
I wish I knew the answer. Is there a book? Did someone write that book? I would love to just take a book off the shelf and read that. I think there are many ways to do that. I think there is no one right way. And one typical way is to decide that the teachers all get training and then we will implement Montessori, right, in the classrooms. And obviously the teachers are the critical component. So professional development for teachers is absolutely important. And I think there is also a way to begin that, because it would be very different. Like, so if you had the opportunity to start a new school, you would want to start with trained teachers, obviously.
Right.
When you have an existing school and you are transforming it, which we are doing with one school here, it is merging and adopting a new pedagogical practice. I think that there are many things to do around changing people's mindset and getting everyone to agree and understand and be committed to the Montessori pedagogy. Montessori is very unique. And when it is not fully understood, it's hard to implement, it's hard to change. Yeah. And so the reason that training would be a valuable first step is because you then know what it is you're striving to do. But even if you don't have that opportunity with an existing school, because you can't send them all to train at the same time, then I think there's a space to begin to look at your practices and see how can we start to change our environments, right? In our Montessori expression, we're always looking at that triangle, right? The teacher, the adult, and the physical environment that create the prepared environment. And that's where the magic happens. It's the interaction of those three parts. Right. So training the teacher is one important part. Mm-hmm. Establishing the environment is another important part. So that's a place that you can start to make some shifts with traditional programs that are going to become Montessori. You start to pay attention to the physical environment. There's a very, I think, a valuable tool that the National Center for Montessori in the Public Sector has developed, and it is called the Developmental Environmental Rating Scale, the DERS, DERS.
Yes, I remember that.
Yes, and it is a tool. I've just begun to use this tool, and what it allows for is to go into an environment and observe characteristics. There are 60 characteristics, 30 relate to the teacher, 30 relate to the child, and 30 relate to the physical environment. Mm-hmm. And it creates a tool that you can go in and you can say, well, I'm seeing one or two things here, one or two things here. So where do we want to start? And they're very discrete tasks. They're discrete objectives that you can focus on to begin to make changes to the way the environment is set up. Teachers can begin to make changes to their practices even before they've done Montessori training. Mm-hmm. And the child indicators are ones where you can say, well, we should see children doing this. We should see children making choices. We should see children being able to sit at tables or on floors. So what can we do? And you don't have to have Montessori training to begin to make those kinds of changes, to create environments that shift the relationship between the teacher and the adult, right? That's an important one. The children are making choices instead of always doing whole class activities. So one immediate thing you could look at is coaching teachers to do small group work instead of whole class presentations. That could be an objective. You could work on that for a while. Mm-hmm. Another would be to look at the physical environment and to allow for different seating arrangements. Are all of the children in desks? Well, could we take some of the desks out and put in some tables? Could we put in some soft chairs? Could there be an open space where children could work on the floor? Mm-hmm. Let's do that. And let's let that be a focus for a month or two or a quarter for classrooms. Everybody's going to work on their physical environment. Right. Mm-hmm. One of the indicators is, collaborative work, right? Are students working together to collaborate on projects, or is everything being given by the teacher and assigned by the teacher, and then the students just complete it? So there are discrete practices that one could put in place to begin to shift the culture of classrooms and of schools to be more child-centered, to be more comfortable and inviting, and to be more flexible. I think those are key components of what characterizes a Montessori environment. I highly recommend the DERS. I think it's a very valuable tool, and it does allow, and it absolutely fits Montessori environments perfectly, but you don't have to have Montessori training or be using Montessori materials. It doesn't ask for Montessori materials. That's not one of the indicators.
Right.
But there should be manipulatives. Children should be able to do hands-on work. Right? They should have plants in the classroom that they're taking care of. So they should have, tools that they use to clean the classroom and to make things, to actually build things. They should have access to art materials all the time, right? And so there are things that traditional environments can use to begin to shift the relationship between teaching and learning and a learning environment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So for a traditional school to transform to we call complete Montessori school, how long will that take?
Oh, wow. That is a good question. I think it would take however long it takes for teachers to get trained and for there to be a full 3-year cycle for students. So it takes some preparation time, and then it takes 3 years. Because I don't think you get to see, like Montessori isn't done until you've had a group of students go through a complete 3-year cycle.
Right.
Right. And so I think it takes a minimum of 3 years, probably 4 or 5. 6 would be comfortable. Right.
Yeah.
6 would be comfortable. As a charter school, we had a 5-year contract. And from the beginning, I was frustrated by that because I said, we need another year. We needed 6 years. So I think 6 years is reasonable. And if you're having to train teachers, that was with us starting with teachers who were already trained. So having to train teachers within that time frame, it adds to that complexity. But I think it takes between 3 to 6 years.
Okay.
Less than that, you'd still have a lot of work to do.
I think so.
Yeah.
So do you think it's important to have all of the teachers, all of the adults in the school are trained, Montessori trained?
No. I think it is important that all of the adults in the school understand and are committed to Montessori pedagogy. I think that's critical, because if there are people who don't agree with Montessori pedagogy, right, they will look for things. They will be unhappy and unsatisfied with what the experience is because they will feel like something's missing, right? So everyone has to be committed to Montessori pedagogy. And so they have to know enough about what it means and why you do the things you do in Montessori to participate and support it, right? You never want someone in an organization that doesn't believe in the organization's goals. So I think that's very important. I also think that it's important for the lead teacher, for one teacher in each classroom, to have full Montessori training. So assistants don't need to have full Montessori training. There are ways to orient and continue to develop assistants in their role as assistants. I think administration, it is beneficial if administration is Montessori trained. There should be roles within, and even if not every person on the leadership team, but within the administrative structure, there should be someone who has Montessori training to be able to hold that vision. What people don't understand often is that Montessori shows up in every decision you make at a school. It's not just the curriculum. It's not just what happens in the classroom. And it's not just the teachers being trained. It's part of a holistic pedagogical approach to being with children. So from the moment they get out of their cars in the morning or off the bus to the moment they leave at the end of the day, every individual they interact with and every environment that they move through must be prepared and aligned with Montessori. So the more people who are trained, the better, but I don't think it's required for everyone to go through a full training, because not everyone is going to be developing lessons and using instructional materials, right? That the training adds that for the people in that key role. I do think it's important for special ed, people who support with special education would be very valuable if they were trained. And I think having assistants have the opportunity to get training, they are often a great pipeline, right? One of the challenges, as you mentioned, is having enough prepared teachers. And so one way to invest for a school and a school system is to invest in assistants getting training so that when there are open teaching positions, someone can move into that role as a way of advancing their career and of always having support for those lead teaching positions. Yeah, I think that would be, I think investing in a pipeline of educators, we call it a pipeline, right? Having more people available to move in when there are open positions is very important. And it is often difficult when we have vacancies in our public Montessori schools. And if there are no trained teachers, then often an untrained teacher is put there who may or may not be even interested in Montessori. And that is difficult for everyone, right? That's not an ideal situation. So.
Montessori is such a good education, good pedagogy. Why do you think there are so few Montessori schools in the world?
Whew, that is a that is a challenging reality that you describe, and I don't have a clear answer. I know that Montessori is not easy to do. Right. I know that, right, getting Montessori training and being prepared as an educator to do Montessori is not easy. And it is the way that we believe learning happens is not a pervasive belief system. I think it is different than the most common, certainly the status quo worldview is that you learn when someone else tells you what to do. Right. And so our belief is completely different than that.
Yeah, not self-construct.
Exactly. And I will say that for transforming educators, right, from traditionally trained educators to Montessori educators, that is the key. It is seeing the child and recognizing that the child is self-constructing. Because if you believe that, then everything you do is different than if you believe that you are responsible for teaching that child. Everything you do as an educator is different depending on that belief system.
Are you still strongly believe that?
Absolutely.
Have you ever doubted
that the children are self-constructing?
Right.
No, I'm still self-constructing.
Yeah.
I'm still transforming. Yes. I'm still learning. Human beings, I completely 100% believe in the potential of every human being from the moment of birth. I believe we have our cosmic task. I believe we are, unlimited potential. And it is the task of education to unleash that potential. And one of the things that makes me sad more than anything is recognizing how many children and grow into adults whose full potential isn't realized.
Yeah.
Right? Who are not given an education where their full potential can be realized, and they don't know their own potential, and they don't know that they can be change agents in the world. That's a tragedy to me. That's a tragedy.
Yes. Yeah, that's why we are doing, we call it experimental education. It's alternative education here in Taiwan.
Yes.
Okay. In your mind, what is a good Montessori school?
In my mind, a good Montessori school has all staff who are committed to the Montessori pedagogy. It has all of the classrooms are a 3-year age span. Mixed ages, I think, are fundamental. Children have large and uninterrupted blocks of work time. And you go into classrooms and you see children happily engaged in work. You see concentration, you see collaboration, you hear chatter, you see big work, you see joy, and you see adults and children enjoying being together. So it's not just the children who are joyful, the adults are joyful and engaged in their work, and they are present with children. You see lots of independence. You see children doing things that you didn't know they could do. You see them building things and making things happen. And then at dismissal, you see parents who interact with teachers and school staff in joyful and positive ways. And probably you see things happening after school where there are additional activities for children to grow and enjoy and experience, and for parents to be involved. Parents probably not necessarily in the classrooms with older children, helping with work and engaged with work, but maybe helping at the school, maybe engaged in committees and doing projects. So successful Montessori school is a lively place where learning is happening for children and for adults. Yeah.
Beautiful school.
Yeah.
What a dream school.
Yes.
Okay, so we really need your advice. Teachers here in Taiwan and then principals who are trying to transform the school. What would you advise us?
Yeah. I appreciate that you mentioned principals. I think leadership is very important. I think it starts with leadership because there are layers of preparation. So I believe that the prepared environment, like things happen when the conditions are right for things to happen. So learning in a classroom happens for children when the conditions are right. The environment is right, the adult is prepared, and they are able to follow their own initiative and explore through their human tendencies, right? I think a school is successful when the adults are comfortable and supported and have what they need. Their needs are met. And so school leadership is very important in creating the environment for staff and for parents. Okay, that's my vision of school leadership, is that they are creating the environment and creating the conditions for those teachers and those parents to support those children. Right?
Could you say more about this?
Oh my goodness, this is
yes. It's very important for the principal.
It is important, and and it took me a while to realize. I was a teacher, and I moved from teaching to administration, and it took me a little while. I think for the first year or two, I spent a lot of time with the children. I was in the classroom. I wanted to see what was happening, and at some point, I realized, wait a minute, that's not my role. The teachers and the children have this relationship. My role is to take care of the teachers. My role is to communicate and take care of the parents and make sure that their needs, right? So a school leader and the leadership team at a school is at the systems level. But the role there is to be the adult. The other adults are, in Montessori, to say that they're the children is not a disrespect in any way, right? Because we respect our children. But we are in service of the other adults being able to do their work and learn and do the best they can for the children. And so as a school leader, I had to shift my focus and really focus on the other adults, not the children. I love being with children. But that role of school leadership, to create the environment, to develop policies, to maintain the facility, to create the parent engagement opportunities, right? To make the school the physical learning environment for all of the adults to interact. And now I'm in a role where I work at the district level. And so now I'm looking at that next layer out of the system, and how can I impact the system so that our Montessori school leaders have what they need? How do I make sure that the budget is specific to the needs of a Montessori school, which is very different than a budget for a traditional school? You're not having to buy those materials. You're not setting up classrooms in the same way. So our budget has to be different. How do I, at the school level or at the district level, make sure that the staffing model is appropriate for Montessori schools, so that there is a teacher and an assistant in every classroom? That's different than in traditional schools. That costs more. That's more personnel being allocated to a Montessori school than to a traditional school. I have to make sure, right? I need to prepare the environment for those school leaders to be able to prepare their environment for the teachers to serve the children, right? I have to look at, from the district level, I need to look at grading. How does the district produce report cards? How do we communicate student progress and the achievement tests? And look at the progress reports. Are they aligned with Montessori? Well, no. If our Montessori schools are doing what they should be doing, then that report card needs to be unique, right? Do we have a department where our special education department, like, is it doing, is it tailored to our Montessori schools? So my role now with the district is looking from that system level and making sure that the system allows Montessori schools and school leaders to do what they need to be faithful to the pedagogy. So I think, and interestingly enough, I think it might, and so where to start, right? Which of those layers to have the impact if you are striving to make Montessori more available and accessible and to do this transformation? I think leadership is key. And I think the system level at the districts, like, to understand that Montessori is a unique model and it needs to be considered in all of those, everything that the district does and has a traditional way of doing, it should be examined and looked at. Every piece of it. Is this in alignment with Montessori? Would we need to do this differently? And advocating at the systems level for that change is necessary for any of the other levels to be able to do Montessori well.
Right. Let's back to school, inside the classroom. How would teacher prepare psychologically and professionally?
Yeah. So the psychological, the first part is the child self-constructing. We've got to unpack that. We've got to make sure you understand that and are willing to make changes based on that.
How long will a student change? Teacher will be nervous.
Yes, they will be nervous. They will. I have heard teachers say, well, I'm used to being in control. I'm uncomfortable letting children make choices. How will I know they're learning?
Yes.
And those are real concerns, right? Because again, everything we do as an educator is rooted in our belief about how children learn. And so to change that, that is significant. And I think it's important that it not be forced. Right. I think it's important that teachers not be told, that a school not be, decide it's going to be Montessori and then all the teachers have to become Montessori teachers. There should absolutely be a process for teachers to say, this doesn't fit with the way I want to teach. And then for them to have other options. Right. So I don't know how that would work for you. But to be able to opt out, we call it opting out. Like, I'd rather no, thank you. Because trying to force someone to become a Montessorian, if they don't believe in it, it's not going to be successful. They won't be happy and they won't do it well. Right. So there has to be choice involved with that. And some people are already there, right? Some people already believe that's true and are already doing things in their traditional classrooms that allow for that worldview and mindset around education. So some will move faster through that and others will take some time to do that. And so I think there's an opportunity to do, to read Montessori and to do seminars. I think there's an opportunity to observe. I think it's important to observe in Montessori schools and in classrooms and see what it looks like and try to get an idea of if that could even feel comfortable. And then, and we are right now, we've taken a slow approach. So we have teachers who are enrolled in, AMI is offering orientation courses, which are relatively short. They're an introduction to pedagogy. They're not teaching lessons or how to use materials, but they're pedagogical, theoretical introduction to Montessori. And having teachers do that before we enroll teachers in an official training program. I think that's important. I think give people an opportunity to explore it and to, move at their own pace. Like my vision for it would be that we could find a way to do it as a Montessori classroom, right? What do? We offer children, we isolate the difficulty, right? And we learn gradually and we follow the child. So different teachers might take different paths. They might take longer. Some might be ready sooner. But thinking about how to isolate that difficulty and say the first step is this belief in self-construction. Right? What's next, right? Independence. Let's just talk about independence and focus on that for a while and begin to move that, move practices and try out practices, right? And for there to be coaching, I think coaching would be very important as teachers are in this process. so that it's not just a do it, and when you're finished training, then you'll be ready to do this in your classroom. But I think really recognizing that change is hard for anyone. And so asking teachers who have been doing something one way for sometimes some of them a very long time. If you have new teachers, I think it's much easier. But when you have teachers who've been teaching for a long time, to allow the process to be to take some time and to be done in incremental steps, I think is a vision. It's something we're exploring and trying to think about and talk about. What would it look like to have, Montessori learning for adults?
Mm-hmm. What would you say to the teachers and principals in the first day of the beginning of the Montessori school as superintendents, in case you are the superintendent? What would you say to them?
Oh, I would say welcome and congratulations. And we have big work to do. Right? This is not going to be easy. Change is never easy. But the goal of our work is deep learning that transforms children's lives and their possibilities for joy and success as adults, and that will eventually make change happen in our world. And we're going to learn together, and we're going to make mistakes, and we don't know all the answers, but we have a vision of a kind of education that supports learning and growth and opens up human potential. And we're going to learn together, and we'll build this together.
Oh, how I wish you were our superintendent here. Well, at the beginning, we talk about the pandemic and how you run the school. And that probably that's the question now. How do you do during the pandemic period? How do you do Montessori education?
So hard. It was so hard. So let me talk about it at each developmental level. I think for primary, to do Montessori education electronically, remotely, is almost impossible. I think what we hope to do in that case it's really educating parents, and it would really be about giving ideas and sharing supports for parents and caregivers, whoever the children were with. What we don't want is a lot of virtual conversation. We know that first plane is sensorial learners. We know they have to have their hands on things. They have to be moving in space. They need to connect and interact with others. So that was so hard to have that limitation. And I don't know what successful primary would look like if we had to be remote. Other than using things. So I witnessed some teachers giving lessons, and they would show a material, and then they would invite children to go, you're doing the color tablets. Okay, everyone go around your house and find 3 yellow things. And they'd go and they'd find something, and then they'd come back and they'd put their yellow things in order, right? So that the children are still getting sensorial experiences on the other side of a screen, right? So that the screen is really just between the teacher and the children, and they're using their materials in their homes. We didn't do this largely, but I would hope that if we ever had to be in that situation, we could make packets of things. I know there were some Montessori companies that were making things that parents could have at home, so that you have some manipulatives. I think that's key. So wherever the child is, they've got to get their hands on something, right? Mm-hmm. And be moving in space. We know that they're developing their language. We know that they're developing movement. And so they have to have opportunities to use language and to have language materials present in their environment. And if that environment is their home environment on the other side of the computer, then our top job as educators is to help those educators, their parents then, or whoever that would be, right, to help those adults in their immediate environment prepare that environment. Right? So it's focusing on the Montessori principle and how do we make that happen when we're not in the same space together. Mm-hmm. For the elementary, I think, again, we have to look at the human tendencies and look at the developmental characteristics and how do we make that happen. For elementary children, they're much more able to use electronic devices. And so many teachers were recording their lessons and then spending the time, and children could watch the lesson and then spending their time, again, with the children doing things in their space, in their workspace, and the teacher sharing and allowing for using breakout groups. So those elementary children need to be social. So how do we allow for that? Well, they put them in great breakout groups so that they could work in their small groups and then they come back together. So creative use of technology in support of the human tendencies and the developmental characteristics. We can't use our same materials, but we can use our same principles. Right? And then for adolescents, even more challenging, but they are even more capable with the technology. Again, group projects, using a learning platform where assignments can be posted so that the adolescent can, choose their work and manage their time and work collaboratively on projects. I know there are a number of schools when, we couldn't go into school, but there, if a school had a large garden or had, if they were keeping bees or doing practical work on their land, they could go in small groups, be socially distanced, and still do the work of the community on a rotating basis. So I know some schools were exploring with that at the adolescent level. So I think it makes it's super challenging because we're used to being together. But as long as we are thinking about the prepared environment not being our classroom, but being wherever they are, how to support them in either their physical space or the computer as their environment for learning, and then just relying on our Montessori principles for how children learn. Yeah. And I think another important thing that has come out of this is for Montessori to be more open to and to be exploring more, experimenting with how we will continue to use technology. Technology is not going away. It is a part of human life in the 21st century. And, we have to, in 2021, we have to be looking at how to incorporate technology at developmentally appropriate levels when we are back in our classrooms, right? How do we continue to use this as a learning tool and as a tool for self-expression and as a tool for creativity and as a tool for information? We'll stay away from the entertainment and the social part of it at school necessarily, but it is a tool that I think we can bring into our Montessori practice in a way that Maria Montessori couldn't possibly have envisioned herself. And so this is part of our work now, is to come to an understanding of how Montessori is a learning tool and can be part of a learning environment, certainly for second and third plane children. Yeah.
So after the pandemic, how is the difference of the role of technology in the Montessori situation?
Yeah, I'm afraid that some schools are trying to keep it out. And I think that would be a mistake. I think it would be a mistake to try to keep it out and to try to go back to, right, our Montessori environments have limited technology. And I think that is work that all schools have to do, and that we should be, as a Montessori community, collecting some data, sharing best practices, creating, grace and courtesy and community agreements around technology and how we will use it needs to be incorporated. But I think it would be a mistake to push it out of our classrooms. I think it is very much a part of current life. And you mentioned adaptation early on, and it is part of our task for young people to be adapted to their time and place.
Right.
And so technology is a part of our lives, and having our learning experience, all right, having the Montessori learning experience be one that includes learning about technology, about ethical use of technology, about responsible use, to be discerning, all of those critical thinking skills that young people need to have, that adults need to have, right? How do we limit our use of technology to using it and not being consumed by it or distracted by it? These are all things that are part of the learning. And so for our children to grow and develop, we can't not talk about it. We have to keep it and find the way that it serves development, right? Technology is a piece of how we serve development. I think we need to understand it better.
So is there any significant change now after the pandemic, the use of technology in the
So here in Cleveland, there's a significant change in that we have committed to continue to use technology. So all of our students, because we were remote for most of last school year, all students in the Cleveland School District have a computer. They were all given a device. So it's called a 1-to-1, right? Every child has a laptop, a Chromebook or an iPad or some kind of an electronic device that has been issued by the school that they take home and have available for use. So that is different. We are looking at blended learning models, how technology will continue to be used. We continue to use our learning management platform. We use Schoology. So all families access Schoology. It's where students can access their assignments from home. So you don't have to have a work planner and take it home in your backpack. You can access your homework assignments and turn in work through this learning portal. Parents can look at it. Teachers put grades directly in it. So yes, in our district, we certainly are using that. And I don't have direct data from other private schools, but I think a lot of people are doing it largely because we still don't know. We may have to close down again. We may have to close for a period of time. And so continuing to have those electronic learning systems available, I think a lot of people are holding on to those. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Talking about adaptation of the schools, I have a question. Should be the last one now. We are approaching the end of the interview. There are some people here in Taiwan trying to build a school for adolescents, Montessori school for adolescents. But we don't necessarily have, as in the big city, we don't have the land, farm for adolescents. How would you suggest us to adjust the idea of?
Yeah. So I have some experience with adolescents not in an urban environment, but in a suburban environment, right? We didn't have a large amount of land, but we were able to build some raised beds and do some gardening. We had bees. And I'm committed to both of the Montessori schools in the district here have through 8th grade. And so we are committed to building adolescent programs here in the city. So I think there are key pieces of that adolescent developmental plane, social independence, economic independence. And so looking for ways to be connected to the land, to be growing things, to be making and building and selling things that don't necessarily need to be large crops, right? But even small gardens can allow you to have some produce to use to cook for yourselves and also then to sell. And then also to make things that are not necessarily grown. So for example, at my previous school, we made soap. Soap making was one of the elements of an occupation and that was then sold at a market. And so there are ways that you can build adolescent engagement work, right? And work and study, right? You're building a center for study and work. And so how are our academic learnings turning into practical things that we are growing, selling, doing, engaging. In terms of social work, you can be engaged with local organizations. Here in Cleveland City Council is an opportunity to be involved. Neighborhood programs and projects are opportunities. So I think it's important. And with the adolescent, you always want to be connected to the place. And so where that school is, looking around to see what is here, what is needed, what can we learn. One of the things that that we first started doing in our program was a watershed study. Wherever you are, you can learn about water. Where does your water go? Where does the water fall? Where does it go? What does that mean? It can be a place to learn science through your watershed studies. So it is an exciting challenge to be able to look around and say, all right, what is in our place and how can we be engaged with it? But definitely raised beds, growing something is really important. But it doesn't have to be a farm. In my perspective, that's just my opinion.
Yeah. Otherwise, what can we do, right?
Yeah. Yes, we have to find ways to make this, to create learning environments that meet our students where they are.
Yeah.
And to learn about their world where they are. Right? There is much to be. You can find your way to the learning experiences from just about anywhere.
Thank you so much. You have a final word for everyone? That's try to learn more
My
Montessori.
final word is one of gratitude and admiration for what you are doing. I'm so excited and energized by the work that you are doing there in Taiwan, and it strengthens my commitment to do this work. I think more Montessori for more children and adolescents is so important in this world. And I admire your commitment, and I admire your focus on how do we do this right. Like there are many situations where an idea comes along and people just jump right in. I appreciate that you are gathering information and that you're spending the time to do the planning so that it can be successful. I'm really impressed and grateful for your work. I wish you the best. And as my little superintendent talk was meant for you. I do mean it.
Thank you very much. I hope we have more time to learn from you and connect with you, especially for the teacher training in the future.
Yes, good. Thank you for the opportunity to share. Thank you for reaching out. It's so nice to be in contact, and we'll continue to learn together.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Bye.
Best wishes.